Hey, before we get into the actual painting demo, I wanted to quickly talk you through how I got from this painting to the second version to the actual final version. I think it's useful sometimes to follow an artist's thinking and working process rather than just seeing the final piece. I don't always get there first pass, rarely I do. The point for me for this painting, and you can see in the reference photo, the arrangement of the boats obviously, and I wanted to paint it in a really loose style, really expressive. And the point really was for me to have this shape or cluster of boats, or one shape, have the background behind it to cut out those boats, negative painting, and then have this reflections as the third big shape. And there's so much wrong with this little painting, I can't even explain it all. Some of the obvious ones are, the boats aren't very nice. I left too much white going on, the shapes aren't really nicely defined. This is all too muddy. And then the big one here is the reflection. Don't even know what to say, it's so bad. So in my second attempt, I also decided, well, maybe I need to flip the actual image, the focal point being on this side of the painting, and then recede into the background. I think this is a much better version. I'm starting to get the reflection right here, creating this as a really strong shape. Still a few things I didn't quite like about it. So I had a crack at the third attempt. I think this one is a good boat. I've reduced it down to 4 boats, made that reflection shape just a little bit nicer, a bit more solid to support this boat. So, took me 3 attempts to get to the painting, and the moral of the story here is don't get frustrated when it doesn't work out. Just learn from your painting and keep iterating until you get to a version that you really like. Alright, if you want to see me paint this at 2 times speed, then obviously stick around, and I hope you enjoy this video. So for this third and final version of this painting, I actually spent a little bit more time with the drawing just to get those boats right. Intent here is to paint fast and loose, but you can see with the sky I didn't draw any clouds or anything. I just have the cloud and the water shapes, and I want to make sure that the cloud and the water have the same hues in there for the reflections, and I just slapped on some blue paint. I've dropped in a bit of dirty raw sienna. There was a bit of other color in my palette, so it's not pure raw sienna, just as a foundation for those boats. And I'm using a fairly soft mop brush here so that I don't have too much control, mixing a darker color for those background hills. The sky is still fairly wet. You can see that creates some soft edges there at the top. I want to make those background hills recede into the painting. Even though it's a very strong shape because it's dark, I'm adding a lot of value to the background hills, but I give them a soft edge at the top so that they still read as being in the distance. If the top edge of those hills would also be hard edges, sharp edges, that will probably compete too much with the boats. So just trying to find the balance there. And you can see I'm painting carefully around those boats. That's why I spend a bit more time with the drawing, just so I get that right. I'm just going to drop in a tiny bit more pigment just to get a sense of the tree line at the top. And you can also see in the background hill that I've varied the colors just ever so slightly. A bit more blue here and there, a little bit more purple. So I've given this a few minutes to dry because I don't want the top of the boats to bleed into the background hills. And now I'm proceeding with a relatively strong yellow. This isn't a watery wash. This got a solid amount of pigment, aiming for sort of a mid value. Yellow you can never really push to a dark value. Yellow is just a high value color by definition. And yellow is obviously a color that attracts our attention. Now moving straight on to the next boat with a blue. That's probably one of my point of contention in this painting, that second boat. Should have probably not made it blue and a bit more of an interesting color. As you can tell, I'm not letting the boats really dry. The pigment is fairly thick, so it won't bleed as much anyway, even if it touches. But part of my ways of painting is to connect shapes. This was also the subject of my last couple of newsletters, my watercolor workout newsletters. The link's in the description if you're interested in that. It's a weekly exercise that I send out mostly to myself for those moments when I want to keep busy with a brush but I don't know what to paint. I just do little exercises. And the last few were around shapes and connecting shapes, just so that you get more cohesion in your paintings. Not letting things dry before you move on in painting helps with a loose look and feel as well. So I've got those few boats in now. Added a little bit of shading into each of the boats. And now I'm putting my attention onto the reflection, which is the other major component of this painting. This is why I've rotated my painting for this attempt, because it's easy for me to paint vertically up and down rather than left to right. That's why it's always a good idea to tape your paper onto a separate board so that you can move it around. I left a few white gaps underneath the yellow and the third boat because I want to drop in some of the color of the boats as a reflection rather than it just being blue. And obviously if I drop the yellow on top of the blue, that would make it green. You can see I still had some blue on my brush and then dipped it into my yellow and it turned out green anyway. You know, that's the dangers of working fast. Room for improvement in those reflections. They aren't the easiest things to paint, reflections, and I've done a few videos already on water reflections, mostly with trees, but when it comes to reflecting boats or buildings, that's a whole other difficulty level there. Alright, then I've got a few poles or masts that I'll drop in a second. So I'll start off with their reflections, because sometimes it's easy to do the reflection first and then align up the actual object later, because reflections have to vertically align, otherwise it looks wrong. Then I've left some white there for some undescript buildings on the shore, so I'm just going to fill that in with a light value. I still want it to be lighter than the background hills, but not in any shape or form compete with the boats. And then this mast here is the vertical counterpart, because we have a lot of horizontals in this painting, so we need something vertically, keep it interesting, break the rhythm and monotony of the horizontals. And I'm using a fine liner here, you can use a rigger brush, whatever works. I should have probably turned my painting around again to make that a little bit easier, drawing a straight line. Probably one of the hardest things for me to do with a paintbrush. The boats still need a bit of detail as well. They haven't got any windows yet, and also where the boat meets the water, I need to darken that a little bit. I've switched to a synthetic brush, and quite a small one there too. That gives me a lot of control for that detailed work. This is a Escoda. It has a very springy point so that I can achieve fine details like windows and small details on the boat. You can tell that I'm not going to go into too much detail with the windows. Windows are a funny thing with buildings, and wherever there are windows you kind of need to get the shape right, but be careful not to add too much detail in it. It's just not needed. Just going to add a few shadow lines here and there for those other few boats, and as I progress from the right to the left side, less and less details. In my first attempt I've left some masks out in my background hill because I wanted them to be white, but that proved to be too difficult, so for this version I'm just gonna use white paint. I use titanium white, which is not entirely like gouache. It's a bit more transparent, so sometimes you need to use one or two layers of that white if you want it to be opaque. But you can see how those few masks and rigging just breaks it up and really adds a lot of detail without it being too detailed. The top of the masks are going to be dark against the light sky, and they're going to be light against a dark background. That's another little trick which I should probably highlight in another video that goes for trees and masks. Okay, a few reflections of things in the background that I probably didn't even paint, but the reflection alone will make your brain fill in the gaps. I'm just adding a few birds just to liven up the scene, because usually where there's fishing boats there are seagulls. It's the law of the universe. And we're done. I'm really happy with the outcome, and I'm happy with the progress I made. I think going from this second painting to the third painting. Now if this was useful, then the best way to support me is to watch another video of mine on YouTube straight away. I'll just put a link here, just click on that one. Thanks for watching.